In the cold, sterile halls of justice, they saw her as nothing, a faded photograph from a life she no longer recognized. Her husband, a titan of industry, sat with his pristine, polished mistress, their lawyers ready to paint her as a desperate, unstable gold digger. They were prepared for her tears, her pleas, her anger, but they weren't prepared for the worn-out double stroller she pushed through the courtroom doors. And they certainly weren't prepared for the quiet, unassuming judge on the bench who held a secret connection so deep it would not only shatter their web of lies, but expose a crime that had been buried for years. Stay tuned, because this isn't just a divorce, it's a reckoning. The wheels of the cheap second-hand stroller squeaked a pathetic protest against the polished marble floors of the Fulton County Courthouse. Each sound grated on Ava Miller's raw nerves, a soundtrack to her humiliation. In the stroller, her 16-month-old twins, Noah and Mia, were miraculously asleep, their cherubic faces a stark contrast to the ugliness surrounding them. They were the only pure good things left from her life with Donovan Caldwell. Donovan. Even his name felt like swallowing glass now. He sat across the cavernous waiting area, a king on a temporary throne of polished oak. He wasn't looking at her. Of course not. His attention was entirely consumed by Brenda Beaumont, the woman who had replaced Ava in her home, her bed, and now by his side in this public dissection of their marriage. Brenda was everything Ava wasn't anymore. Her blonde hair was a sleek architectural marvel that probably cost more than Ava's monthly grocery budget. Her cream-colored pantsuit was immaculate. Her posture exuded a bored, effortless wealth. She whispered something in Donovan's ear, and he chuckled a low, rumbling sound that once made Ava feel safe. Now it made her stomach clench with a mixture of grief and acid rage. They looked like a power couple on the cover of a business magazine. Ava with her worn-out cardigan, the faint stain of baby food on her shoulder she'd tried to scrub out, and the dark circles under her eyes felt like a ghost haunting their victory party. Her lawyer, Jessica Riley, a young, earnest woman from legal aid, placed a reassuring hand on her arm. Ava, just breathe. We have a solid case for fair child support and alimony. His financials speak for themselves. Ava nodded, but her gaze was fixed on the thick, leather-bound briefcase carried by Donovan's lawyer, Arthur Peterson, a man who looked like he was carved from granite and greed. She knew what was in there. Character assassinations, doctored timelines, reports from private investigators designed to paint her as an unstable, unfit mother who was trying to extort a fortune from a long-suffering man. The life they were about to describe in court was a work of fiction. They would erase the years Ava spent supporting Donovan when he was just a struggling architectural draftsman with a dream. They would omit the inheritance from her father, a modest sum, but everything he had that she'd poured into Donovan's first business venture. They would conveniently forget how she'd worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat while he networked and schmoozed, promising her the world once his company, Caldwell Designs, took off. And it had taken off, spectacularly. Caldwell Designs became synonymous with innovative, eco-friendly urban development. Donovan became a local celebrity, the visionary architect changing the city's skyline. And Ava became invisible. She was the supportive wife, the homemaker, and then the mother. The moment Mia and Noah were born, it was as if a switch flipped. Donovan's late nights at the office became more frequent, his business trips longer. The scent of Brenda's cloyingly expensive perfume, Fleur de Rocher, started clinging to his suits. The discovery had been brutal, a classic cliché. A text message that flashed on his phone while he was in the shower. Can't wait to have you all to myself tonight. The world had tilted on its axis. The confrontation was a blur of gaslight and denial, until he finally spat the truth at her like venom. He was done. He wanted a partner who was his equal, not a glorified nanny. He wanted Brenda. He'd offered her a settlement that was a calculated insult enough to keep her quiet, but not enough to live on comfortably contingent on a non-disclosure agreement and her silent, dignified exit from his life. For the sake of her children, she had refused to be silenced. She asked for what was fair, what the law dictated, she and their children were owed. In response, Donovan had declared war. "All rise." The bailiff's voice boomed, jolting Ava from her bitter memories. The heavy doors to courtroom 4B swung open. Donovan and Brenda stood gliding past her without a glance. Mr. Peterson gave Ava and her squeaking stroller a look of profound disdain. Jessica helped her maneuver the stroller through the doorway. The courtroom was intimidating, all dark wood and imposing flags. At the bench sat a man who looked to be in his late 60s, with a fringe of white hair, sharp blue eyes, and a face that seemed etched with the weight of countless broken families. A small plaque on the bench read, "Judge Robert Finnegan." He looked over his spectacles, his gaze sweeping the room. It lingered for a moment on the stroller, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, before settling on the lawyers. "Let's begin," Judge Finnegan said, his voice calm and authoritative. "We are here today for the matter of Caldwell vs. Caldwell. Mr. Peterson, you may begin." Mr. Peterson rose, buttoning his suit jacket. "Thank you, Your Honor. We are here today to bring a swift and equitable end to a regrettable situation. My client, Mr. Donovan Caldwell, a pillar of this community and a respected business leader, has been more than generous in his attempts to dissolve this marriage amicably. Unfortunately, Ms. Miller has responded with unreasonable and frankly avaricious demands based on a wildly inflated sense of entitlement." Ava flinched as if struck. Avaricious demands. He made it sound like she was asking for a private jet, not enough money to ensure her children had food, housing, and health care. "Mr. Caldwell will be seeking full custody of the minor children, Noah and Mia Caldwell." Peterson continued, his voice smooth as silk. A gasp escaped Ava's lips. Jessica's hand shot out to grip her wrist. This was new, a devastating escalation. Peterson smirked. "We have reason to believe that Ms. Miller's current emotional state and living situation are not conducive to a stable environment for the children. Mr. Caldwell, along with his partner, Ms. Brenda Beaumont, can provide a level of stability and resource that Ms. Miller simply cannot." Brenda sat up a little straighter, a faint, compassionate smile gracing her lips, as if she were a saint volunteering to rescue orphans. Judge Finnegan held up a hand. "Custody was not the primary motion for this hearing, Mr. Peterson. Let us first address the financial dissolution and support claims. We will address custody in due course should it be necessary." His eyes, however, once again flickered towards the sleeping twins. The battle had begun, and as Ava looked from her sleeping children to the man she once loved, and the woman who had helped him destroy her, she knew this wasn't just a fight for money. It was a fight for her identity, her future, and the very truth of her life. She clutched the worn leather strap of her satchel, the only weapon she had left. Inside, amongst the baby wipes and spare pacifiers, were a few faded notebooks that held the last vestiges of the man her father used to be, and the ghost of the dream Donovan had stolen. She just had to pray it would be enough. The air in the courtroom grew thick with a tension that felt physically suffocating. Mr. Peterson, with the predatory grace of a shark, began his methodical dismantling of Ava's life. He presented an image of Donovan as a magnanimous, long-suffering husband, burdened by a wife who had grown increasingly erratic and demanding after the birth of their children. "Your Honor," Peterson began pacing before the bench. Mr. Caldwell has provided Miss Miller with a beautiful home, a generous allowance, and a life of comfort she could never have achieved on her own. Yet since the arrival of the twins, her behavior has become concerning. He produced a series of credit card statements. Here we have charges for multiple high-end baby items, organic food deliveries, specialist consultations, an expenditure pattern that far exceeds the generous allowance Mr. Caldwell was providing. Jessica Riley stood up, her voice firm despite her youth. "Objection, Your Honor. Those are standard expenses for the care of 2 infants. My client was ensuring her children received the best possible care." "The best or the most expensive?" Peterson retorted without missing a beat. "Is it standard care to hire a sleep consultant for $500 an hour, or to import specialty formula from Switzerland when domestic brands are perfectly adequate?" Ava felt her face burn with shame. He was twisting her love, her maternal anxiety, into a weapon against her. The sleep consultant was a desperate act after weeks of sleepless nights with 2 colicky babies. The Swiss formula was the only one that didn't leave Mia screaming in pain from reflux. But in Peterson's telling, she was a frivolous spendthrift, squandering her husband's hard-earned money. Next, he called a witness their former nanny, a young woman named Tiffany. Ava had let her go 3 months ago after discovering she was frequently on her phone, ignoring the children. Donovan had apparently kept in touch. Tiffany, coached to perfection, spoke of Ava's mood swings. She described Ava as being constantly overwhelmed and frequently in tears. She mentioned an instance where Ava had dropped a jar of baby food, shattering it on the floor, and had simply sat down and cried instead of cleaning it up. She just seemed so fragile, Tiffany said, dabbing at a non-existent tear with a tissue. I was worried about her being alone with the babies. Ava stared at her hands, her knuckles white, as she gripped the table. She remembered that day. It was after 72 hours with less than 5 hours of sleep. Noah had a fever. Mia had an ear infection. And Donovan was unreachable on a business trip to Aspen, a trip she later learned that he had taken with Brenda. The dropped jar hadn't been a sign of instability. It had been the breaking point of a bone-weary, abandoned mother. Judge Finnegan listened impassively, his face a mask of judicial neutrality. He made occasional notes, his pen scratching quietly in the silent room. His gaze would sometimes drift to the twins, who had started to stir, making soft, sleepy sounds. Then Peterson turned his attention to Brenda Beaumont, calling her to the stand, not as a mistress, but as a concerned party. Brenda moved with a serene confidence, taking the oath with a hand on the Bible that looked like a blasphemy to Ava. "Ms. Beaumont." Peterson began gently. "How long have you known Mr. Caldwell?" "Donovan and I have been business associates for several years," she said, her voice smooth and modulated. "Our relationship only became personal after his marriage had, for all intents and purposes, completely broken down." A bald-faced lie. Ava had phone records proving their affair had started long before the breakdown. But Jessica had advised her to hold that back, to let them build their house of cards before she revealed her hand. "And in your time with Mr. Caldwell, have you had occasion to observe his interactions with his children?" "Oh, absolutely." Brenda gushed, her face softening into a beatific smile. "Donovan is a wonderful father. He adores Noah and Mia. When he has them, he's completely present, reading to them, playing with them. He's a natural. It's my belief that a child needs 2 parents, and if one is struggling, then the other must step up. And I, of course, would be there to support him and the children in every possible way." The implication was clear. She was the stable, supportive partner who could help Donovan raise his children, rescuing them from their hysterical, incompetent mother. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Miss Beaumont, you are the Chief Operations Officer at Caldwell Designs, is that correct?" Brenda's smile tightened a fraction of an inch. "That's correct, Your Honor. I've been with the company since its early growth phase." "So you have intimate knowledge of the company's financials and operations?" he asked. "Yes. I'm proud to say I've been instrumental in our success," she said, puffing up with pride. "I see," the judge said, making another note. He looked back at Peterson. "Do you have anything further for this witness?" "Not at this time, Your Honor," Peterson said, looking smug. He had successfully painted Ava as the unstable past and Brenda as the brilliant future. The clock on the wall ticked towards the lunch recess. Mia began to fuss in her stroller, her soft cries cutting through the tense silence. Ava instinctively reached back her hand, finding the stroller's handle, rocking it gently. The sound seemed to annoy Donovan, who shot her a look of pure irritation. He, the wonderful father, couldn't bear the slightest interruption from his own child. Judge Finnegan observed the small, silent exchange. "We'll break for lunch," he announced, his voice flat. "We will reconvene at 2:00 p.m., at which time we will hear from Ms. Miller." As the judge swept out of the room, Donovan and Brenda rose, surrounded by their legal team. They walked right past Ava's table. As Brenda passed, she paused for a microsecond, her eyes flitting down to the fussing baby, and then up to meet Ava's. There was no sympathy in her gaze, only a cold, triumphant pity. The look said, "You've already lost. This is just a formality." Ava's heart hammered against her ribs. Humiliation washed over her in a cold wave. They had twisted every sacrifice, every moment of a mother's struggle into a weapon of shame. They had assassinated her character with surgical precision. As she tended to Mia, changing her diaper on a portable mat on the floor of the public restroom, she felt a profound despair. How could she fight this? How could she, with her worn-out cardigan and her legal aid lawyer, stand against the mountain of wealth, power, and lies that Donovan and Brenda had constructed? She looked at her daughter's innocent face, then at Noah, who was now awake and babbling softly. They were all she had. They were the reason she couldn't give up. Wiping her tears with the back of her hand, she packed up the diaper bag and dug into her satchel, past the baby supplies. Her fingers brushed against the hard covers of the old notebooks. They felt flimsy, insignificant against the weight of the opposition. But they were all she had. They were the truth. And as she headed back to the courtroom, she prayed to a God she wasn't sure she believed in, any more that the truth, for once, would be enough. The afternoon session began with a heavy stillness. The lunch break had done nothing to dissipate the tension. It had only allowed it to marinate. When the bailiff called her name, Ava Miller, to the stand, a tremor went through Ava's body. This was it. She settled into the witness box, the wood cool and unyielding against her back. Jessica gave her an encouraging nod. Across the room, Donovan watched her, his expression a mask of detached boredom, while Brenda whispered to him, a slight smirk playing on her lips. They looked like spectators at a dull play, waiting for the final predictable act. Jessica began with gentle grounding questions, allowing Ava to find her voice. She asked about when she met Donovan, their early years, the dreams they had shared. Ava's voice was soft at first, but it gained strength as she spoke of a time before the bitterness, before the betrayal. "We met in college," Ava said, looking not at Donovan but at a point on the far wall. "He was brilliant, full of ideas. I was studying business administration. My late father, Arthur Pendleton, was a structural engineer. Not famous, but he was a genius in his own way. He was always sketching, always designing. He believed architecture could be kind, sustainable, good for the planet and the people living in it. A flicker of annoyance crossed Donovan's face. Mr. Peterson shifted in his seat, ready to object to the irrelevant tangent. Jessica prompted her. "And did your father share these ideas with Donovan?" "All the time." Ava said, a sad smile touching her lips. Dad loved Donovan. He saw him as the son he never had. They would spend hours in my father's workshop, poring over his notebooks. My father was old school. Everything was hand-drawn with meticulous notes in the margins. "Your Honor," Mr. Peterson interjected, his voice dripping with condescension. "While this trip down memory lane is undoubtedly touching, I fail to see its relevance to spousal support calculations. I believe my client is establishing the foundation of the marital partnership, Your Honor," Jessica countered smoothly, "and the non-financial contributions she and her family made to Mr. Caldwell's eventual success. If I may have a moment." Judge Finnegan waved a hand. "Proceed, Ms. Riley, but get to the point." Jessica walked back to their table and picked up Ava's worn satchel. From it, she pulled out 3 thick, leather-bound Ayaho notebooks. Their covers faded and the corners softened with age. "Your Honor, I would like to enter these into evidence as Miller Exhibits A, B, and C." She placed them on the clerk's desk. They looked ancient and insignificant next to the glossy-bound presentations from Peterson's team. "Ms. Miller," Jessica said, turning back to her, "can you identify these items?" "They were my father's," Ava said, her voice now clear and steady. "They're his design journals. They contain years of his concepts, his theories, his sketches on sustainable urban development." Donovan let out a short, derisive laugh. Brenda rolled her eyes so extravagantly it was almost a theatrical performance. "And why have you brought them here today?" Jessica asked. When Donovan started Caldwell Designs, Ava explained, her gaze finally locking with her husband's. "We had nothing. I gave him the $30,000 my father left me for seed money. But the real seed money, the intellectual capital, it was all in these books, the core concepts for the Viridian Tower, Donovan's breakthrough project, the rainwater reclamation system, the passive solar heating design. It's all in Notebook B, page 47. A murmur went through the courtroom. Mr. Peterson was on his feet instantly. "Objection. This is a baseless and fantastical accusation. My client is a celebrated architect, a visionary. Is this court seriously entertaining the notion that his success is based on the scribbles of an amateur hobbyist?" "My father was not a hobbyist," Ava shot back, her voice ringing with sudden fire. "He was a brilliant engineer who couldn't afford a patent lawyer for every idea he had. He trusted Donovan. He treated him like a son." Judge Finnegan held up a hand, silencing Peterson. "The objection is noted. Ms. Miller, are you alleging that your husband's acclaimed designs were in fact stolen from your father's work?" "I am not alleging it, Your Honor. I am stating it as a fact," Ava said, her chin high. "Caldwell Designs was built on a foundation of my money and my father's genius. That is a marital contribution that Mr. Peterson's spreadsheets conveniently omit." Donovan was no longer bored. His face was a thundercloud of fury. He leaned over and hissed something to Peterson, who immediately requested a moment to confer with his client. Judge Finnegan, however, seemed more interested in the notebooks. "Bailiff, please bring me the exhibits." The bailiff carried the heavy journals to the bench. The judge put on his reading glasses and opened the first one. The courtroom was silent, save for the rustle of old paper, as the judge turned the pages. He ran a finger over the intricate, hand-drawn schematics, the dense, spidery handwriting. He spent a long time looking his expression unreadable. Ava's heart pounded in her chest. It was a wild, desperate move, and she had no idea if it would work. She was banking on the faint hope that the truth presented in its rawest form could cut through the polished lies. Donovan and Peterson were whispering furiously. Brenda looked shaken, her perfect composure finally cracking. She kept glancing from the notebooks to the judge, a sliver of panic in her eyes. After what felt like an eternity, Judge Finnegan closed the notebook. He took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly with a handkerchief. He looked down at Ava, his blue eyes sharp and piercing. "Ms. Miller." He said, his voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the room. "Your father's name was Arthur Pendleton, you said." "Yes, Your Honor." "And he worked for the City Planning Department for over 30 years before retiring in 2010. Ava's brow furrowed. It was public record, but it was a strange, specific question. "Yes, that's right. How did you—" The judge didn't answer her directly. He looked over at Donovan, whose face had gone pale. "Mr. Caldwell," the judge said, his tone suddenly laced with steel, "your testimony is next. I believe we will have a great deal to discuss." He banged his gavel. "We'll take a 15-minute recess." As the judge stood, he kept one hand resting on top of the old notebooks, as if protecting them. Ava watched him go, a strange, terrifying hope blooming in her chest. The judge knew something. Her father's ghost, trapped for years in the ink and paper of his life's work, had finally found a voice in the one place she'd least expected it. And for the first time all day, Donovan Caldwell looked afraid. The 15-minute recess felt like a lifetime. Donovan's team huddled in a corner, their hushed, frantic conversation a stark contrast to their earlier swagger. Brenda Beaumont was agitated, her fingers constantly flying across her phone screen as she typed furiously. She looked cornered, the mask of serene superiority crumbling to reveal something ugly and desperate beneath. Ava sat with Jessica, her hands trembling. "What just happened?" she whispered. "Does he know my father?" "I don't know." Jessica admitted, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and excitement. "But whatever it is, we have their attention. He saw something in those books that rattled him. When you get back on the stand, just stick to the truth. Don't embellish. Let the notebooks speak for themselves." When the court reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted irrevocably. The air crackled with anticipation. Judge Finnegan returned to the bench, his expression grim. The notebooks remained beside him, a silent, powerful presence. Donovan Caldwell was called to the stand. He tried to project his usual aura of confident charm, but it was a brittle facade. His smile didn't reach his eyes, and a muscle twitched in his jaw. Mr. Peterson began his questioning, attempting to regain control of the narrative. "Mr. Caldwell, let's address this outlandish accusation. Your ex-wife has suggested that your architectural achievements were stolen from her late father. Could you please tell the court about your relationship with Arthur Pendleton?" "Arthur was a wonderful man," Donovan said, his voice smooth but strained. "A sweet, kind soul with a passion for engineering. I was very fond of him. We had many conversations about design, it's true. He was a great sounding board in my early days." "And his notebooks?" Peterson prompted. "Did you ever look at them?" "Of course," Donovan said with a magnanimous shrug. He was very proud of them. They were full of interesting ideas, theoretical concepts. But with all due respect to Arthur, they were amateurish. They lacked the practical application, the understanding of modern materials, science, and zoning laws required to make them a reality. They were pipe dreams, not blueprints. He was trying to diminish Arthur Pendleton, to patronize his memory, and dismiss his life's work. Ava felt a surge of rage. It's a common practice for artists and creators to be inspired by many sources. Donovan continued warming to his theme. I may have seen a concept in his books that sparked a thought, which led to another thought, which after thousands of hours of work by myself and my team of highly paid professionals evolved into a viable award-winning design. To suggest its theft is not only insulting to me, but it's a fundamental misunderstanding of the creative process. He leaned back, looking pleased with himself. He had spun a plausible, condescending tale. Judge Finnegan had been listening intently. Now he leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Donovan. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm looking at Exhibit B, page 47, the design for a heliotropic facade with integrated grey water filtration. The schematics are incredibly detailed." Donovan's smile faltered. "As I said, Your Honor, an interesting concept, but—" "It's more than a concept," the judge interrupted, his voice sharp. "It's a fully articulated mechanical design, and it looks remarkably similar to the patented sun swivel facade on your Viridian Tower, the one that won you the Pritzker Architectural Prize. The principles may be similar, but my design was developed independently." Donovan insisted, his voice rising slightly. "Independently." The judge echoed a note of disbelief in his voice. He opened another notebook, Exhibit C. "Let's turn to page 112. Here your father-in-law details a method for reinforcing concrete with recycled polymer fibers, creating a lighter, more tensile building material. He even gave it a name: Arthrocrete. Is it just a coincidence, Mr. Caldwell, that the signature material used in your Oasis residential project is a patented composite called Caldcrete, which a cursory search reveals uses the exact same polymer fiber integration method?" Donovan was speechless. His face was ashen. He looked at Mr. Peterson, who seemed equally stunned into silence. The judge wasn't finished. He continued, his voice low and dangerous. "For 10 years before I was appointed to the bench, I was a patent attorney. But before that, for a very long time, I was a junior engineer at the city planning department. My mentor, the man who taught me everything I know about structural integrity and professional ethics, was a senior engineer named Arthur Pendleton." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Ava felt the air leave her lungs. Jessica grabbed her hand under the table, squeezing hard. Donovan looked like he had seen a ghost. "I knew your father-in-law, Mr. Caldwell." The judge said, his gaze like chips of ice. "I worked with him for 5 years. I spent countless hours in his workshop. I recognize his handwriting like I recognize my own. I also recognize his signature, which he put on the bottom of every completed design." The judge turned the notebook around, though it was too far for most to see. "Like this one here, at the bottom of the Arthrocrete design. AP, with a small stylized drawing of a cantilever bridge." He looked directly at Donovan. He called it his mark of integrity. "Tell me, Mr. Caldwell, how did a design complete with my mentor's personal mark of integrity end up in your patent application filed 3 years after his death?" The courtroom was utterly silent. The Titan was unraveling on the stand. His arrogance had evaporated, replaced by the raw, primal fear of a man caught in an inescapable trap. He opened and closed his mouth like a fish, but no sound came out. Mr. Peterson jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, I must strenuously object. You are using personal privileged information to question my client. You should have recused yourself. Recused myself." Judge Finnegan thundered, his voice filling the room. "On what grounds, Mr. Peterson? I had no idea who Ava Miller's father was until she stated his name in this courtroom 30 minutes ago. I had no prior knowledge that the evidence presented would pertain to a man I once knew. What I have is a first-hand expert ability to recognize intellectual property theft when it is staring me in the face. Your objection is overruled. Sit down." Peterson sank back into his chair, defeated. The judge turned his piercing gaze back to Donovan. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm going to ask you again under oath. Did you or did you not take Arthur Pendleton's designs, claim them as your own, and build your entire business empire upon them?" Donovan stared, trapped in the harsh spotlight of the truth. His empire, his reputation, his entire fabricated life was crumbling around him, all because of a few dusty notebooks and the terrible coincidence of a judge who remembered the quiet integrity of a good man. The silence in the courtroom was a living thing, heavy and absolute. Every eye was on Donovan Caldwell, who sat cornered in the witness box, the color drained from his face. The charming visionary was gone, replaced by a pallid, sweating fraud. Judge Finnegan's words hung in the air, an indictment far more powerful than any legal argument Jessica could have made. "Mr. Caldwell," the judge repeated his voice, dropping to a low, chilling calm, "the court is waiting for your answer." Donovan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He looked to his lawyer for help, but Peterson could only offer a helpless, panicked shrug. He was on his own. It was an homage." Donovan stammered the word, sounding pathetic even to his own ears. "A tribute to his genius. I was carrying on his legacy." "You were carrying on his legacy by erasing his name from it." The judge retorted, his disbelief palpable. "By filing patents and accepting awards for work you did not do. That is not a legacy, Mr. Caldwell. That is fraud. That is a crime." The word crime landed like a physical blow. This was no longer a divorce hearing about assets and custody. It had morphed into something far more serious. The judge continued, his focus relentless. Arthur used to talk about a magnum opus, a grand project he was designing for a competition years ago, a self-sustaining skyscraper. He called it the Arcology Project. It was his dream. He poured years into it. "Tell me, does that name ring a bell?" Donovan remained silent. His jaw clenched. "Let me refresh your memory," the judge said, flipping through another notebook. "Ah, here it is. Exhibit A. The entire concept, from the foundational geothermals to the rooftop arboretum. It's all here." He looked up, his gaze sweeping past Donovan to the woman sitting behind him. "Ms. Beaumont?" Brenda jumped as if she'd been tasered. "As Chief Operations Officer, you were instrumental in the company's success, you said. You would have been deeply involved in the initial public offering of Caldwell Designs 5 years ago, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Brenda said, her voice a thin, reedy whisper. "Then you would be familiar with the prospectus filed with the SEC." The judge continued, "The one that outlined the company's intellectual property assets, the crown jewel of which was a massive city-sanctioned development project currently under construction down at the waterfront." He paused for effect, letting the pieces click into place for everyone in the room. "A project called the Arcadian." Ava's hand flew to her mouth. The Arcadian. It was Donovan's biggest project, a multi-billion-dollar development that had made him a legend in the city. He had told everyone the name was inspired by a utopian dream. But it wasn't. It was a bastardization, a clumsy theft of her father's Arcology project. "Ms. Beaumont," the judge's voice was like a surgeon's scalpel, "the SEC filing for the Arcadian project's initial patent portfolio. Who was the signatory on the original design patents, who attested that the work was the original creation of Donovan Caldwell?" Brenda's carefully constructed composure shattered. Her face, which had been a mask of cool confidence, was now a canvas of pure terror. I don't recall the specifics." "Oh, I think you do," the judge said grimly. He gestured to the clerk. "Madam Clerk, would you please do an online public records search? I want the incorporation documents for Caldwell Designs LLC from 12 years ago, and the initial patent filings for USPTO number 7, 432, 118, Integrated Systems for a Self-Sustaining Structure. The clerk's fingers flew across her keyboard. The silence was deafening, broken only by the frantic clicking of the keys, and Mia, who had woken up and was making soft, cooing sounds in her stroller. That gentle sound was a surreal counterpoint to the utter destruction unfolding. After a moment, the clerk's voice rang out, clear and precise. Incorporation documents for Caldwell Designs show 2 initial partners, Donovan Caldwell and Brenda Beaumont. A wave of shock rippled through the gallery. Brenda hadn't just been an employee who came on later. She was a founding partner. She had lied under oath. And the patent signatory, Madam Clark, the judge asked, though he already seemed to know the answer. The application for Patent 7-432-1118 was filed by Donovan Caldwell, the clerk read. The sworn declaration of originality was witnessed and co-signed by Brenda L. Beaumont. It was the final nail in the coffin, a conspiracy laid bare. Brenda wasn't just the other woman who had wrecked a marriage. She was the accomplice who had helped Donovan build his empire on stolen dreams. She was there from the very beginning, helping him launder another man's genius and present it as his own. Her instrumental role in the company's success was as a co-conspirator. The judge leaned back, the full weight of his revelation settling over the room. "So let me see if I have this correct," he said, his voice dripping with icy contempt. "Mr. Barreau, Caldwell, you took the life's work of your fiancé's trusting father. You, Ms. Beaumont, as his business partner, helped him file fraudulent patents and build a corporation on this theft. And today the 2 of you came into my courtroom and attempted to use the wealth generated by this crime to take that same man's grandchildren away from his daughter, painting her as unstable and avaricious." He looked from Donovan's ashen face to Brenda's horrified one. "This is no longer a divorce hearing," Judge Finnegan declared, his voice booming with righteous fury. "This is now the scene of a crime, a conspiracy to commit fraud on a massive scale, confessed to and corroborated by evidence, right here in my courtroom." He stared down at them, no longer a judge in a domestic dispute, but an arbiter of a much deeper justice. The secret was out not just of an affair, but of a decade-long deception that had ruined one family and unjustly enriched 2 criminals, and the consequences were about to be catastrophic. The judge's declaration hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen out of the room. The words, crime, conspiracy, and fraud echoed off the polished wood walls. The illusion of a simple, if messy, divorce had been utterly annihilated. Brenda Beaumont looked as if she had been physically struck. The blood drained from her face, leaving her with a ghastly, chalky complexion that clashed with her expensive tan. Her eyes, wide with panic, darted from the judge to Donovan, to her lawyer, searching for an escape that didn't exist. The poised, untouchable COO was gone. In her place was a trapped animal. "No!" she whispered, the sound barely audible. Then louder, "No!" She shot to her feet, her chair scraping backward with a jarring screech. "This is a lie," he told me. "Donovan told me the designs were his." All heads swiveled towards her. Mr. Peterson tried to grab her arm to pull her back down, to silence her before she could immolate herself completely, but she shook him off with a vicious snarl. "Donovan!" She shrieked, her voice shrill and ragged, all traces of her polished accent gone. She pointed a trembling finger at the man in the witness box. "You told me his father was a crackpot. You said they were just doodles and you were making them real. You swore to me it was all yours." Donovan, for his part, looked completely broken. He stared at her, his mouth agape, as she single-handedly dismantled any hope of a coordinated defense. He had been exposed as a thief. She was now exposing him as a liar and manipulator within their own corrupt partnership. "You used me." Brenda's voice climbed higher, cracking with hysteria. "You used his ideas, and you used my business degree to make it all legal. I built that company with you. I managed the investors, I handled the IPO. I did everything to make you a star, all based on your lies." Judge Finnegan watched the spectacle with a grim, unwavering gaze. He made no move to stop her. He was letting her dig the hole, giving her all the rope she needed to hang both herself and her lover. "Your Honor," she cried, turning her wild eyes to the bench. "He manipulated me. I am a victim here too." "A victim," the judge repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "Ms. Beaumont, you signed a sworn legal document attesting to the originality of work you now claim you thought was doodles. You profited for over a decade from this alleged manipulation, living a life of extreme luxury. You sat in this very courtroom an hour ago and piously offered to provide a stable home for the children of the woman whose family you helped defraud. You are not a victim. You are an accessory." Each word was a hammer blow. Brenda staggered back, clutching her throat. The legal and financial ramifications were crashing down on her. The SEC investigation, the shareholder lawsuits, the criminal charges, the prison time. Her perfect, curated life was dissolving into a nightmare in real time. She whirled back to Donovan, her face contorted in a mask of pure hatred. "I will not go down for you, you pathetic, cowardly thief. I'll tell them everything. Every corner you cut, every bribe you paid for zoning variances. Everything. I have records. I have copies of everything." It was a full-blown confession and a threat broadcast in a court of law on the record. Mr. Peterson buried his face in his hands. Donovan's lawyer could only stare, his jaw slack with disbelief at the utter self-destruction he was witnessing. The dam of Brenda's composure finally burst. A loud guttural sob escaped her lips. "He promised me everything," she wailed to the courtroom at large. "A partnership, a future. He said she meant nothing to him. He was going to leave her, and we would have it all." Her eyes found Ava. The hatred in her gaze was now mixed with a venomous, desperate jealousy. "And you with your whiny, pathetic act, coming in here with your crying babies and your sad little story, you think you've won, he'll have nothing left. You'll get nothing, I'll see to it. We'll all have nothing." Her breakdown was complete. The elegant, powerful woman had been stripped away, revealing someone grasping, vicious, and utterly terrified. She was no longer the mistress or the COO. She was just a common criminal, screeching as the walls closed in. The bailiffs, finally acting on a silent nod from the judge, moved towards her. "Ma'am, you need to calm down." "Don't touch me," she screamed, backing away. "It was all him. It was all his fault." The scene devolved into chaos as the bailiffs tried to contain the hysterical Brenda. Her shrieks echoed through the chamber as they escorted her struggling and sobbing out of the courtroom. In the stunned silence that followed her exit, the only sound was the soft babbling of Mia in her stroller. She was awake, her innocent blue eyes, so much like her grandfather's, surveying the wreckage of the adult world around her. Judge Finnegan looked down from the bench. His gaze fell on Donovan, who was still sitting in the witness box, a hollowed-out shell of a man. Then he looked at Ava, who sat holding her children's stroller, tears streaming silently down her face. They weren't tears of sadness, but of a profound, shattering vindication. The judge cleared his throat, his voice regaining its command. "This hearing is suspended," he announced. "Mr. Caldwell, you are not to leave the jurisdiction. I am informing the District Attorney's Office of these proceedings immediately. I expect a criminal investigation to be launched into Caldwell Designs yourself and Miss Beaumont for at minimum felony fraud, perjury, and conspiracy." He banged the gavel, the sound like a gunshot in the silent room. The war Donovan had declared on Ava was over. He hadn't just lost a divorce case, he had lost everything. The aftermath of Brenda's meltdown was swift and decisive. The courtroom was cleared, but the shockwaves of what had transpired were just beginning to spread. As Ava stood shakily, Jessica at her side, a court officer approached them. "Judge Finnegan would like to see you and your counsel in his chambers," the officer said quietly, his tone respectful. Numbly, Ava nodded. She pushed the stroller down the now empty corridor, the squeaking of the wheels the only sound. The twins were both awake, looking around with wide, curious eyes, blissfully unaware that their entire future had been rewritten in the last hour. Judge Finnegan's chambers were lined with books, a stark contrast to the imposing courtroom. He was standing by the window, looking out over the city skyline, the Donovan that her father had helped shape. He turned as they entered, his stern, judicial demeanor replaced by a look of weary kindness. "Ms. Miller, Ava," he said, his voice gentle. "Please sit." He looked at the twins, a soft, sad smile on his face. Arthur used to talk about wanting grandchildren. He would have adored them. Tears welled in Ava's eyes again. "Thank you, Your Honor, for seeing the truth." "It wasn't me, my dear," he said, shaking his head. "It was your father. His integrity, his meticulous nature. It was all right there on the page. I was just the one fortunate enough to be able to read his language." He sighed. "I will be recusing myself from the remainder of your divorce proceedings, obviously. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to continue. However, before I do, I am issuing an emergency temporary order." He picked up a document from his desk. "Given the evidence of extensive financial fraud and the likelihood that Mr. Caldwell's assets will be frozen pending a criminal investigation, I am granting you sole, legal, and physical custody of the children, effective immediately. Furthermore, I am ordering an immediate liquidation of 10% of Mr. Caldwell's personal, non-corporate stock portfolio, a sum of approximately $5 million, to be placed in a trust for you and the children. This is to ensure their welfare while the larger financial mess is untangled. It is not alimony or a settlement. It is an immediate protective measure for the welfare of Arthur Pendleton's grandchildren." Ava was stunned into silence. $5 million. It was a sum so vast, so beyond her comprehension, after months of scrimping and saving, that it didn't feel real. It was security. It was a future. It was a home for her children, free from fear and uncertainty. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "You don't have to say anything," the judge said kindly. "Just be the wonderful mother I can see that you are. Your father was a good man, Ava. He deserved better than to have his legacy stolen. In a way, what you did today, you gave it back to him." Leaving the courthouse was a surreal experience. The sun seemed brighter, the air fresher. As they stepped outside, they were met with a small gaggle of reporters. Someone from inside the courtroom had leaked the story. "Ms. Miller, is it true that Donovan Caldwell's empire was built on fraud? Are criminal charges being filed?" Jessica stepped in front of Ava. "Ms. Miller has no comment at this time. She asks for privacy for her and her children." She guided Ava through the throng, a protective shield against the burgeoning scandal. A black town car pulled up. It was from Jessica's firm. The head of the Legal Aid Society had called her, having heard the news, and sent his personal driver. "We're going to be getting you some pro bono help from the best intellectual property lawyers in the state," Jessica said, her voice buzzing with excitement. "We're not just getting you a divorce settlement, Ava. We're going to get your father's name back on every building, every patent. We are going to correct history." As the car pulled away from the curb, Ava looked back at the courthouse. She saw Donovan being led out a side door by his lawyer, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He looked small, pathetic, a hollowed-out man, stripped of his stolen glory. There was no sign of Brenda. Ava turned her gaze forward. In the stroller, Noah had reached over and taken Mia's hand. They babbled to each other in their own secret language. A new life stretched out before them, one that would be difficult and complicated as the legal battles ensued, but it would be their own. It would be a life built not on lies or stolen dreams, but on the quiet strength of a mother who had refused to be broken, and the enduring legacy of a good man whose voice had finally been heard. The fight was far from over, but the war had been won. She had walked into that courthouse a poor, desperate wife. She was leaving as a guardian of a legacy, a protector of her children's future, and a woman who had, against all odds, found justice in the ghost-written words of her father's notebooks. Ava's incredible journey through the storm of betrayal and deceit is a powerful testament to the fact that truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always fight its way to the light. She walked into that courtroom with nothing but her love for her children and the quiet legacy of her father, and she emerged with justice. Her story reminds us that integrity is the one currency that can never be truly stolen, and that the strength of a mother is one of the most formidable forces on earth. The moment the judge recognized her father's work, and the instant the mistress's web of lies unraveled, justice wasn't just served, it was reclaimed. If you were moved by Ava's fight for truth and her family's legacy, please show your support by hitting the like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear a story of resilience and ultimate vindication. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications for more powerful, real-life stories where the underdog gets their day and the truth finally triumphs.